Picture this. It's deep inside a cave system in what is now southern France, roughly 30,000 years ago, and a small group of ancient humans is moving carefully through a narrow passage, well over half a mile from the nearest opening to daylight. They're carrying small stone lamps filled with animal fat. The flickering light barely cutting through a darkness so complete it would feel almost physically heavy to anyone used to modern artificial lighting. They're not lost. They're not hiding from some immediate threat, at least not in this particular moment. They're going exactly where they intended to go, deep into the earth for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with simply needing a place to sleep that night. And once you understand why, the entire question of why ancient humans spent so much time living, working, and traveling deep underground starts looking a lot less like desperate necessity and a lot more like something genuinely deliberate. So let's dig into the question this video exists to answer. Why did ancient humans live deep underground, sometimes traveling astonishing distances into total darkness far beyond what simple shelter from weather would ever require? Stick around because the real answer involves genuine archaeological mystery, some seriously impressive ancient engineering, and a few discoveries that have left actual professional researchers scratching their heads about exactly how far ancient humans were willing to go, quite literally in pursuit of safety, art, and possibly something we still don't fully understand. Let's start by clearing up an important misconception, because it shapes how we should think about this whole topic. When most people picture ancient humans living underground, they imagine something like a single, simple cave near the surface. Basically a rock room with a fire pit, used purely as basic shelter from rain and cold. That image isn't wrong exactly, but it's dramatically incomplete, and it misses almost everything genuinely interesting about this topic. Plenty of ancient human cave use was indeed exactly that simple, practical, surface-adjacent shelter, taking advantage of a natural rock overhang or shallow cave mouth for protection from weather and predators. But there's a separate, much stranger category of evidence showing ancient humans deliberately traveling deep underground, far beyond any reasonable definition of simple shelter, into total darkness, navigating narrow passages, sometimes for the equivalent of a full day's journey one way, for purposes that clearly went well beyond just needing somewhere dry to sleep. Let's talk about basic shelter first, though, because it deserves proper attention before we get into the deeper, stranger stuff. Caves and rock shelters near the surface offered genuinely significant practical advantages for ancient humans, and it's worth understanding exactly why this made such obvious sense. A cave provides natural protection from wind, rain, and snow without requiring any construction at all, which represented a meaningful energy savings compared to building a shelter completely from scratch. Caves also maintain relatively stable internal temperatures year-round, staying noticeably cooler in summer and warmer in winter compared to the more extreme swings happening outside, due to the insulating properties of surrounding rock and earth, similar in basic principle to the partially underground shelters we discussed in an earlier video about ancient survival methods generally. And critically, a cave with a single, narrow entrance is dramatically easier to defend against predators compared to an open campsite with no natural barriers at all, since a group only needs to actively monitor and protect one access point rather than worrying about threats approaching from every possible direction simultaneously. Now let's go deeper, literally, because this is where the genuinely fascinating archaeological mystery actually begins. Sites like Chauvet Cave and Lascaux in France contain some of the most spectacular ancient cave art ever discovered. But here's the detail that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. This art isn't located conveniently near any cave entrance where natural light might still reach. It's located deep within these cave systems, in chambers reachable only after navigating long, narrow, completely dark passages, sometimes requiring crawling through genuinely tight spaces, sometimes located well over a kilometer from the nearest opening to the outside world. Whoever created this art had to travel that entire distance carrying their own light source, work in cramped, uncomfortable conditions, and then travel back out, all without any practical shelter benefit whatsoever, since nobody was actually living, sleeping, or sheltering from weather in these specific deep chambers. This detail matters enormously because it tells us something genuinely important. Deep cave use wasn't purely about practical survival shelter at all. Something else was driving ancient humans to make this kind of difficult, deliberate journey into total darkness. So, what was actually going on down there? Let's talk about one compelling theory first, because it connects directly to themes we've explored throughout this entire series regarding ritual, ceremony, and meaningful social gathering. Many researchers studying deep cave art sites have proposed that these locations functioned as deliberately significant ceremonial or spiritual spaces, set apart specifically by their difficulty of access and complete isolation from ordinary daily life. Think about the sheer psychological weight of that journey itself, leaving behind daylight entirely. Traveling through narrow, disorienting passages with nothing but a small, flickering lamp, finally arriving at a chamber that no casual visitor could ever stumble upon accidentally. That journey alone would have represented a genuinely profound, deliberately transformative experience, completely different from anything encountered in ordinary surface life. Some researchers have specifically suggested that this kind of sensory deprivation, combined with the physical difficulty and effort required to even reach these deep chambers, may have been deliberately designed to produce a particular psychological or even altered mental state, something researchers studying ritual behavior across various cultures have documented repeatedly as a genuine recurring pattern. Difficult journeys and physical hardship used deliberately to set apart and intensify the significance of whatever ceremony or experience awaited at the destination. Let's bring in something genuinely interesting regarding the acoustic properties of these deep cave chambers too, because this represents a fascinating, relatively underappreciated piece of evidence. Researchers studying the specific locations of ancient cave art within these deep systems have found a striking, statistically significant correlation between where the most elaborate, carefully executed artwork appears and chambers with particularly notable acoustic properties. Spaces where sound resonates, echoes, or carries in genuinely unusual, distinctive ways. This has led some researchers to propose that sound itself, chanting, singing, or rhythmic drumming, may have played a direct, deliberate role in whatever activity took place in these deep chambers, with ancient humans specifically seeking out and utilizing locations where sound behaved in ways that would have felt genuinely powerful, even otherworldly, layered on top of the complete visual darkness and dramatic, flickering lamplight illuminating carefully painted animals on the surrounding walls. Imagine the actual sensory experience involved. Deep underground, completely isolated from the outside world, surrounded by paintings of animals rendered with genuine artistic skill, with sound itself behaving in strange, amplified, echoing ways that simply don't happen anywhere on the surface. That's not a casual shelter experience. That's something deliberately, carefully constructed to feel genuinely significant. Now let's address something genuinely important regarding the actual subject matter of this deep cave art, because it connects directly to broader patterns we've discussed throughout this entire series. The animals depicted in these deep cave paintings, bison, horses, deer, mammoths, lions, frequently represent species that were genuinely significant to ancient human survival, either as crucial prey animals or as serious, sometimes dangerous competitors and predators within the same ecosystem. Some researchers have proposed that this art may have served a function connected to hunting magic or ritual preparation, a deliberate attempt to symbolically engage with, honor, or perhaps even psychologically prepare for encounters with these genuinely consequential animals, well before any actual hunt took place. Whether this interpretation captures the full picture or only part of it remains genuinely debated among researchers, since we obviously can't directly interview anyone who actually participated in creating or experiencing this art to confirm the exact intended purpose. But the consistent thematic focus on animals genuinely central to ancient survival, combined with the deliberate, difficult effort required to create this art in such inaccessible locations, strongly suggests this wasn't simply decorative behavior. It represented something the people involved considered genuinely important enough to justify an enormous amount of effort, skill, and physical difficulty to actually produce. Let's talk about something genuinely fascinating regarding the technical sophistication involved in creating this deep cave art too, because it deserves direct attention here. Creating detailed, skillfully rendered paintings in complete darkness, reachable only after a genuinely difficult journey, required real planning and genuine technical mastery. Ancient artists needed reliable portable lighting, typically small stone lamps burning animal fat, requiring careful fuel management to last through an extended working session deep underground. They needed pigments, often mineral-based ochre and charcoal, prepared and transported specifically for this purpose. And they needed genuine artistic skill, since plenty of this deep cave art demonstrates remarkably sophisticated technique, using natural rock contours to add dimension and movement to painted animals, employing perspective and shading techniques that some art historians have specifically noted wouldn't look entirely out of place in considerably more recent artistic traditions. This wasn't casual scribbling done on a whim during a brief, accidental cave visit. This represented serious, deliberate artistic effort requiring real preparation, genuine skill, and significant physical commitment to actually execute successfully in such a genuinely difficult environment. Let's bring in something genuinely important regarding handprints specifically, because this represents another widespread, genuinely fascinating pattern found across numerous deep cave sites. Researchers have documented extensive collections of handprints, created either by pressing a pigment-covered hand directly against the cave wall or by blowing pigment around a hand held against the surface, creating a kind of negative silhouette image found repeatedly throughout deep cave systems across multiple, geographically separated locations. Some of these handprint collections include prints clearly made by children, sometimes quite young children, raising genuinely interesting questions about exactly what kind of activity was happening in these deep, difficult-to-reach chambers and exactly who was actually participating. If young children were being brought on this difficult, potentially dangerous journey deep underground specifically to leave their handprint alongside adults, that detail strongly suggests these deep cave visits represented something considered genuinely significant enough to involve, and presumably deliberately teach, even the youngest members of the community, rather than representing some kind of restricted, adults-only activity. Now let's talk about something genuinely sobering and important regarding the actual physical risks involved in this kind of deep cave use, because it's worth being honest about exactly how dangerous this behavior genuinely was. Deep cave systems present real, serious hazards completely separate from anything found on the surface. Narrow, disorienting passages where getting lost represented a genuine, potentially fatal risk. Unstable footing in complete darkness, the constant risk of a lamp running out of fuel at exactly the wrong moment, and the simple, accumulated physical exhaustion of navigating genuinely difficult terrain for hours at a time. The fact that ancient humans repeatedly, deliberately accepted these genuine risks, traveling deep underground not just once but apparently as an ongoing, sustained cultural practice across many generations at certain sites, tells us something genuinely important about how significant this behavior must have felt to the people actually doing it. This wasn't casual curiosity. This represented a sustained, repeated commitment to an activity that carried real, serious danger, which strongly suggests whatever purpose this deep cave use served, it was considered genuinely worth that risk. Let's address something genuinely interesting regarding why caves specifically, rather than some other kind of constructed space, may have held particular significance for ancient humans, because this connects to broader patterns of human psychology worth exploring directly. There's a reasonable argument that caves, by their very nature, represent a genuinely unique kind of space, a literal threshold between the familiar, sunlit surface world and something else entirely, completely dark, silent except for echo and dripping water, seemingly separate from ordinary daily existence in a way that no surface location could ever replicate. Various documented traditional cultures around the world maintain beliefs treating caves, springs, and other below-ground locations as genuinely significant, sometimes sacred spaces, often associated with origin stories, spiritual transition, or connection to ancestors and the broader natural world. While we obviously can't directly confirm exactly what specific beliefs ancient humans tens of thousands of years ago actually held regarding these deep cave spaces, the remarkably consistent pattern of humans across independently developed cultures worldwide treating caves and underground spaces as genuinely significant rather than purely practical strongly suggests this kind of perception likely extends deep into ancient human history as well. Let's talk about something genuinely important regarding social knowledge and exclusivity here too, because this connects to broader patterns we've discussed throughout this series regarding specialized roles and accumulated expertise within ancient communities. Successfully navigating deep cave systems. Finding your way reliably through narrow, branching passages in complete darkness, managing limited lamp fuel efficiently, knowing exactly which chambers held particular significance, represented genuine, specialized knowledge that almost certainly wasn't equally distributed across an entire community. It's entirely plausible that certain individuals held particular expertise and responsibility specifically regarding these deep cave journeys, functioning as guides or specialists whose accumulated knowledge of these dangerous, complex underground spaces carried real significance and respect within their broader community. Similar to the specialized plant and food safety experts we discussed in earlier videos, just applied toward an entirely different, genuinely hazardous domain of accumulated practical knowledge. Now let's bring in something genuinely fascinating regarding a slightly different category of deep underground use that's worth distinguishing from the ceremonial cave art sites we've focused on primarily so far: actual long-term habitation in deep, extensive cave systems, particularly in certain regions with genuinely harsh surface conditions. Some archaeological sites show evidence of sustained, repeated habitation within cave systems extending well beyond the immediate entrance area, suggesting certain ancient groups, particularly in regions facing especially brutal seasonal conditions, may have genuinely utilized deeper portions of suitable cave systems as more extended, practical living space, beyond just the simple, surface-adjacent shelter use we discussed earlier. This represents a somewhat different motivation than the ceremonial deep cave art sites, driven more directly by practical survival necessity during genuinely extreme conditions. Taking advantage of the remarkably stable temperature deep cave systems can provide, sometimes remaining within a genuinely narrow temperature range year-round, regardless of how extreme conditions become on the surface above. Let's address something genuinely important regarding the specific challenges this kind of extended underground habitation would have presented too, because it wasn't without real, significant downsides worth acknowledging directly. Extended time in deep, dark cave environments away from natural sunlight would have presented genuine challenges, including disruption to natural sleep and waking patterns typically regulated by light exposure, and potential vitamin D deficiency from extended absence of sunlight exposure, a genuine health concern that modern researchers studying human physiology have specifically identified as a meaningful risk for any population spending extended periods away from adequate sun exposure. This suggests that even in regions where deep cave habitation provided genuine practical survival advantages against extreme surface conditions, ancient humans likely balanced that underground time carefully against regular surface activity whenever conditions allowed, rather than living permanently, continuously deep underground without ever returning to daylight, exactly the kind of practical, balanced adaptation we've seen ancient humans demonstrate repeatedly throughout this entire series when navigating genuinely difficult environmental trade-offs. Let's bring in something genuinely interesting regarding burial practices and deep cave use too, because this connects directly to themes we explored in earlier videos regarding ancient grief, love, and careful treatment of the dead. Various ancient burial sites have been discovered within deep cave systems, sometimes in locations requiring genuinely difficult access, suggesting that for at least some ancient communities, certain deep cave chambers held particular significance specifically as final resting places for deceased community members. This connects directly to broader patterns we've established throughout this series regarding how seriously ancient humans treated death and burial generally, suggesting that the same impulse driving careful, deliberate burial practices on the surface may have, in certain communities and certain circumstances, extended toward deliberately selecting deep, difficult-to-reach cave locations specifically because that genuine difficulty and separation from ordinary daily life made these spaces feel appropriately significant for honoring the dead. Let's circle back to something genuinely important tying this entire conversation together: the common thread running through basic shelter use, deep ceremonial cave art, specialized underground habitation during harsh conditions, and significant burial practices all points toward the same underlying conclusion. Ancient humans related to underground spaces in a genuinely sophisticated, multifaceted way, far beyond simple, basic shelter from weather. Caves served practical survival purposes when genuinely needed, but they also apparently held genuine psychological, social, and possibly spiritual significance that drove ancient humans to undertake genuinely difficult, sometimes dangerous journeys deep underground for purposes that had little or nothing to do with immediate physical survival at all. This represents exactly the kind of complex, layered behavior we've documented repeatedly throughout this entire series, demonstrating that ancient human life involved far more than pure, minute to minute survival calculation, extending into genuine ritual, art, social meaning, and apparently a recognition that certain spaces set deliberately apart from ordinary daily existence by genuine difficulty and darkness deserved special treatment and special purpose. Let's bring this all the way back to our opening scenario. That small group navigating deep, narrow passages with nothing but small stone lamps, traveling well over half a mile from daylight for reasons that clearly went beyond simple shelter. Based on everything we've actually covered here, that journey almost certainly represented something genuinely significant within their community, possibly ceremonial, possibly tied to hunting preparation, possibly connected to honoring ancestors or marking some kind of important life transition, undertaken with real, deliberate effort and accepted risk precisely because whatever waited at the end of that dark passage was considered worth that difficulty. They weren't simply looking for somewhere dry to sleep. They were engaging in something that required real commitment, genuine skill, and apparently a willingness to venture into one of the most genuinely disorienting, challenging environments available to them, all in pursuit of something that mattered enough to justify that effort. So, why did ancient humans live deep underground? Based on practical shelter advantages near cave surfaces, genuinely significant ceremonial and ritual use of much deeper chambers connected to elaborate cave art. Fascinating acoustic properties apparently deliberately utilized in certain deep chambers, sustained habitation in deeper cave systems during genuinely extreme surface conditions, deliberate burial practices in significant, difficult to reach locations, and a broader pattern of treating underground spaces as genuinely meaningful. Rather than purely functional, the honest answer reveals something considerably richer and more complex than simple survival necessity alone. Ancient humans weren't just hiding from weather and predators when they ventured underground. They were engaging in deliberate, sometimes genuinely dangerous behavior that speaks directly to the same depth of social, emotional, and possibly spiritual life we've documented throughout this entire series, demonstrating that even one of the most seemingly simple, practical aspects of ancient survival, finding shelter, actually concealed layers of genuine meaning and purpose that modern people are still working to fully understand. And maybe that's genuinely the most fascinating takeaway buried in this entire topic. Somewhere deep beneath the surface, in chambers most people will never see, and few researchers can even safely access, ancient humans left behind a kind of message, carefully, deliberately created in some of the most difficult conditions imaginable, telling us, even across an almost incomprehensible span of time, that they were capable of far more than simply surviving. They were capable of seeking out darkness on purpose, carrying light deep into the unknown, and creating something genuinely meaningful in a place that offered absolutely nothing in return except whatever significance they themselves chose to give it. If this kind of deep dive into the genuinely mysterious, layered behavior hiding underneath ancient daily life is your thing, there's plenty more buried in this same direction. Ancient ritual and ceremony, ancient art beyond cave painting, even how ancient humans handled darkness and fear of the unknown more broadly. So stick around because there's a lot more buried underground, literally and figuratively, than most people ever expect to find.